Welcome, and thank you for joining us for today's discussion on taking the first step towards better mental health. We're living in a world which has changed dramatically in a very short period of time. The COVID 19 pandemic has disrupted the lives of every person on the planet in some way. On the one hand, it poses a threat to the very survival of many, especially the most vulnerable sections of society. On the other hand, it has forced each one of us to make significant changes in our daily lives. We've adapted to new ways of working, studying, coping with various pressures and stressors. And for some of us, it has even prompted new ways of thinking. But in addition to creating new challenges, the pandemic has also brought attention to certain underlying issues which have often been neglected for various reasons. Mental health is one such issue, and it holds particular significance. As the present pandemic persists, experts suggest that the need for mental health and psychosocial support will substantially increase in the coming months and years. Mental health is something that we all have. Mental health issues and disorders affect each of us in different ways. At times, this can happen directly. At other times, indirectly, through those who we are close to. This could be a friend, a family member, or a colleague. And it's important to keep in mind that how we choose to perceive these issues and the people living with them is critical in determining the quality of life that they enjoy. Recently, the Director General of the WHO, Dr. Ghebreyesus, brought attention to some troubling global statistics. 1 billion people across the world are living with mental disorders. Nearly 3 million people die due to the harmful effects of alcohol. And one person dies every 40 seconds from suicide. Day is World Mental Health Day, which is observed on October 10th each year with the objective of raising awareness of mental health issues across the world and marshalling efforts in support of mental health. The day provides an opportunity for all stakeholders working on mental health issues to talk about their work and discuss what more needs to be done to make mental health care a reality for people worldwide. This year, the WHO and their partner organizations are calling for greater investment in mental health services across the board. We at the Mandate Project believe this is the perfect opportunity to kickstart a broad and open conversation around mental health and to place it on the public agenda. We intend to approach this in the same spirit as our other initiatives, which is by involving people from different disciplines and walks of life. This includes, but is not limited to, mental health specialists, policy practitioners, the general public, and most importantly, those who are living with mental health issues, so that we may collaborate and produce a united front in the effort to dismantle the structural and attitudinal barriers to achieving better mental health for all. We intend to do this by creating awareness about mental health issues, identifying service and policy gaps, creating support groups, and involving the community, and finally, in engaging in mental health advocacy with all stakeholders. So, with this little introduction in mind, I'd like to begin our discussion, and I do so by inviting Arpita, who is a psychologist and has been researching on mental health issues for the past few years. And I invite her to give us a brief introduction into mental health care in India and to identify some of the key challenges that need to be tackled as we go forward.
Today we're discussing about mental health care in India, and one of the key challenges is addressing the stigma that revolves around mental health. Stigma promotes discrimination, and discrimination leads to marginalization. Having a mental health concern can be disabling for a lot of us, and so we want to encourage inclusivity in our society. And so I think it's time we should really start challenging our beliefs and think of ways to not contribute to the existing stereotypes, the negative stereotypes that revolve around mental health. One of the ways we can do that is by being mindful about the language that we use around mental health. Saying things like, she's a psycho, he's being bipolar is not okay, because mental health concerns are not adjectives to be used in our daily lives. And so we need to strengthen our voice, hear more from people with lived experiences, and also start prioritizing our own mental health in our lives. So, today we attempt to tackle stigma around mental health through this dialogue about um, how to take the first step towards healing and what mental health really is all about.
Thanks, Arpita. I think you've set the tone for the discussion to follow very well. You talked about stigma being one of the most pervasive and harmful problems associated with being identified as someone with mental health issues. And as you pointed out, the choice of language that we use to disparage people showcasing certain issues can have disastrous consequences on their own sense of identity, while also trivializing very real problems many have to live with. So it's important that each of us be mindful of about what we say. So thanks for a great start, and I think we can easily move on to the next segment of this session, which is a candid conversation between our discussants on mental health, on therapy, and various perception-related issues. So we'll try and explore some of these themes through different perspectives centered around lived experience of those working in the field and those outside of it. For example, I approach this discussion as a layperson. I've never been to therapy, but I have very close friends and people in family who have. And I've watched them start from a place of denial and unease to one of acceptance and even confidence as they took the decision to seek help. So, for me, I hope to understand more about what some of the personal hurdles are that are faced by anyone who feels that they need assistance. Also, to try and understand what one expects from therapy. So, what are the possible outcomes? And other than therapy, also to explore other options, like what else is out there? Where can one turn if they feel they need assistance? And from time to time, it would be great if we manage to pan out and explore some of the societal and systemic concerns surrounding mental health. I know that's a lot to tackle, and we only have limited time. So let's get started with the easiest and the most, the logical first question, which is, what does mental health mean to you?
So, mental health is the subjective experience of an individual's social, emotional, and psychological self. It has an impact on the way we think and feel, which in a way determines how we handle stressful situations in our lives. Um, and it also impacts our decision making process throughout our lives.
Yeah, definitely. So I think for me, I think about how I explain it when I'm trying to tell people about therapy and about mental health. I mean, I feel like mental health it's just like like a physiological health basically, because there are certain things that you have a lot of control over, like you have control over your diet and your exercise, and you kind of have to keep up healthy habits, and at the same time there's certain things that are just in your genetics and you just can't help them. So the analogy for mental health is like there are certain things that are in your that are in your control, that you have a choice to kind of actively do or not do because they are good for you or not good for you. um, like you can avoid certain toxic thought patterns, you can avoid people who don't make you feel good about yourself, things like that. But then at the same time, people who have a genetic predisposition towards depression or schizophrenia, like those are things they can't avoid. Also, like we are ruled by our hormones, and like you can't always know, what's causing you to feel a certain way, and it's not always external factors. So I think there's so many different things that cause it, which means all the more that you have to pay attention to your mental health. It's also something that I think people think of as a very reactionary thing. So, they feel upset or they feel terrible for like years, and then they say, oh, I need to look at my mental health. I think it's more about like maintenance, and it's more about proactively checking in with yourself and doing things every day to feel better. And I think that that's a really crucial thing. I don't know if it's part of being a millennial, but there's this thing about just like working and working, and work now, sleep later, pull all nighters, and I've never felt like that. Just never made sense to me. So I guess long story short, I think of mental health as something that we need to just pay attention to the same way we go to the gym and eat healthy and all of that. And the main aim is to do things that ultimately help you achieve your goals. And if you feel good about yourself, if you can get through the day without feeling like absolute crap, then you're gonna be able to achieve your goals. But if something's holding you back, and it's a tiny thing that's like nagging at you, it's gonna hold you back. So that's a very long answer to what mental health means to me.
Um, I think longer answers are better because it gives you an insight into the working of a person's mind and see how they navigate, difficult things. And so for that, thank you for sharing. I think a lot of people would be able to relate and understand to what you said. And since you talked about, some of you brought up the idea of mental health being something that requires maintenance. It's like taking care of your body. Similarly, you take care of your mind. And before we turn to our experts once again, I thought I would throw in my layperson understanding and something that I remember from an experience in my life. So this was in grad school, and it's a time where you're faced with a lot of pressure. Pressure to do well in school, a lot of paper submissions, and on top of that, if you're living away from home, as many people do, there's also the pressure of running your home, of juggling your job, your personal life, all of these things. And at a time where I think I was under, in fact, all of us were under a lot of pressure, close to the end of semester. I had a conversation with a friend of mine, and he said a simple thing, and he said, it's really important to have mental hygiene, and it's an important thing towards having good mental health. So I know we have psychologists and therapists here, so I'm not going to get into what mental hygiene means for them. But through our discussion, the shared meaning that we constructed was, it's about watching not only what you let in, so not only external inputs coming in, and we know there's a lot of them, social media, the news, various things we watch, we read, conversations we have. There's a million and one things, and with technology, it's only increased exponentially. So the external inputs are one thing, but then there's also like your responses to your environment, to these inputs, and even to thoughts that come over, that may be sort of emanating from deep-seated issues, worries, anxieties, fears, and it's mental hygiene for us became you know being careful about what you let your mind entertain, what thoughts and sort of what responses you sort of play with in your mind. So I think it's something that's essential, and it's something that everyone needs to be think about and understand what fits and works for them. I think everybody needs to develop their own good practices around mental hygiene. And yeah, it's just something that left an impression. So I thought I'd share it. And how about we hear from our experts now? Hmm.
So, I think in earlier for me, mental health was to feel at peace. Like there are times when a person feels a lot of emotions, and what I observed is that I had a habit of escaping those emotions because the idea of feeling at peace felt really important. And in that process, I didn't realize that I wasn't addressing the issues. I was merely suppressing them and running after an idea. So recently, I took a break from work and everything. And what I realized that whatever self-care practices I did during that break, the definition of mental health for me changed, because it's actually about talking to yourself first as to what you're going through, whether it's anxiety, whether it's depression, whether it's post breakup depression, whether it's even something more deep, say a mental health disorder. First, to accept it within my own self. The first step is to just accept it. That's what I felt, instead of just escaping it and feeling like if I'm not going to think about it, it'll just fly away. So it's just a very personal experience. So what I did, I just wrote down everything that I was feeling in my body, from heart palpitations to not being able to sleep at night till 9 in the morning. And I then sort of thought, what are the reasons of the changes that are happening, why I was experiencing anxiety. I then also thought that I'm going to call my therapist, speak to her, and just self care practices and awareness of this has helped me a lot. So for now, for me, mental health is just acceptance of whatever it is that you're going through. It could even be a headache, which might feel like a headache, but if you think about it, for even if you think about it for 10 minutes, you'll know that it's not a headache. It's actually a psychosomatic thing. It's actually a stress that you have stored in your head. So, what I did is that I understood that mental health is about accepting your trauma, accepting the life that you have lived, and then releasing it from your body via professional help, via your own self-care practices, or just being in your bed maybe for some time. So I think that's a very small definition, but that's what I feel about it in the present
I
moment.
mean, through this lockdown, mental health has become this buzz concept, like this concept that's like going around a lot. And everybody is learning great terminologies like toxicity and, mental health illnesses and supporting each other and being there for each other. However, at the end of the day, it'll be helpful if we could just normalize these as plainly as human experiences, and not, because at the end of the day, these are all just labels that we describe, use to describe certain things. Like, we're just labeling something so that, because what is human existence? I want to get existential on you guys. What is human existence? It's about trying to make sense of the world around us, and how we do it is by assigning labels to things. So calling something a mental health illness is labeling it as such, because it's how we would like to describe a certain group of experiences that a person is going through. And yeah, so like
It's great to gain this understanding of your how you view mental health. So each of you have offered a very diverse set of viewpoints and made some interesting observations, and I'd like to pick up on a few of these. You've mentioned therapy as well as self-care practices, and if we just circle back to the beginning of the discussion, we started by talking about stigma and perception. So I think it would be really helpful to understand from your experiences what kind of hurdles you faced in your personal journeys towards getting the help you needed. So I gather that the first step is kind of a pre-step, which involves having an open conversation with yourself. Understanding what's going on and figuring out what you might need. I imagine that this is something that could be made easier by talking to a friend or a family member who's already sought help, or someone who is open-minded and likely to be receptive to your needs. Someone you trust, someone you feel comfortable having that conversation with. And at the same time, I can't help but think that reaching out to the wrong person, that on the other hand can have a very detrimental effect if you're shamed or shunned, which could potentially set you back, and make you suppress the issues even deeper. So faced with such fears and concerns, how did you decide to take the first step? What were the biggest hurdles you felt you faced? And was it only the stigma or a sense of isolation? Was it a fear that you would not be understood? Or was it a lack of knowledge regarding what options were available and who you should turn to? So when you're facing that degree of uncertainty and risk, where do you begin really? I mean, I imagine that this would be something paralyzing, if you're in that situation. So I'd love to, hear from you and try and formulate a picture on what this looks like and, how one begins on the journey to seeking the help that you need. So yeah.
Yeah, definitely. I think once you've kind of made up your mind or almost made up your mind, and there's so many things that make you think, oh, maybe I don't need it yet. Like maybe I still don't need it. Like let me put it off. And I think one of those is cost, right? Like therapy is expensive, and if you want to commit to it, like I think I know people who think you just go to therapy for a couple of months and you deal with your problem and you're done. But I knew going in, like it's a long term thing. So that was a really big thing for me. Like when I was a student or when I was like working for a couple of years, I didn't feel I could justify to myself spending that much. So definitely the financial aspect of it um, is huge. And then also you don't know how to find therapists, right? Because you don't want to ask your friends always. You don't want to. You can't ask your colleagues. That's like admitting right there that something is going on, and you don't always want people to know that. And you don't know if you can trust just what's on Google. I think especially in India, I think that's it's harder to find resources. So I think ultimately, I was lucky to have a friend group where people were really open about talking about it. And so I just, I heard through like word of mouth, and that's how I found anyone. And then even then, like in that process, like I got a list of like 10, 12 different people in the same city I live in, and I literally called up 5 of them just to hear that they had really long wait lists and I would have to wait 6 months. So it's a long process, and finally, when something works out, then it's like, okay, now I have to make this work. I don't care what excuse I tell people when I'm not gonna show up to our meeting because I have to go for this thing, or it's really far away, or I have to go right after work, or I have to leave a work meeting early. You make it work, but there's a lot of hurdles both before getting there and then also like when you do get to that stage. um, and then to just address the second part of your question as well, right, about like what can a person expect from therapy. I of course can't be the sole voice here, because I think every person and every therapist and every experience is completely different. But I would say for me it was really more just about like every session is more just about picking up certain things, and they may not be the most like pressing or worrying issues at the time, but I think a skilled therapist like knows how to get at that. And so as the client in the relationship, I kind of just have to just let down my guard a bit and just like trust and kind of follow her line, or his line of questioning, and let them guide me there. I think also, you see on TV that like every therapy session has to be this sad thing, or this, this thing where you leave with an insight or whatever. And I don't think that's the case. I think some sessions in my experience have just been sessions, and others have led to an insight, and others have like a delayed insight that I'll get like 3 weeks later. It's, like I think it's a very holistic thing that once you start doing it, it starts to maybe make sense in places and at times that you don't expect it. And that might not happen in the session and in that room. It might happen like a week later. So yeah, that's been my experience.
So I'd actually like to problematize the first hurdle that you brought up, which is cost and affordability. Often discussions about the need and benefits of mental health services or therapy are criticized because they overlook the fact that most people are unable to afford these due to the high costs and out of pocket payments that they entail. As a result, these are perceived as being reserved for privileged sections of society, as they remain inaccessible for financially weaker sections. And to my mind, as a policy problem, this arises as a result of the relative lack of importance accorded to mental health. Experts have pointed out repeatedly how mental health and physical health are not placed on the same footing, and this is one of the causes for the access gap. For a long time, for instance, mental health services did not come within the ambit of insurance. This changed with the introduction of the Mental Health Care Act in 2017 and the guidelines issued under it. However, even now, few insurers have complied with the requirements and included mental health care services till now. So, since we're here to discuss mental health care services for all, I'd like to pose a question to the professionals with us. So, what are some of the options that are available to those who need assistance but cannot afford professional help? What are some of the initiatives by civil society that you're aware of working to bridge this gap? And can you give us a little bit of an idea of what the mental health care landscape currently looks like? So, just to understand and gauge how far we are from having mental health care access to all in our country.
Yeah, so treatment gap and affordability is definitely one of the biggest challenges in the mental health field. And the way I see it, there are two sides of this. There are people who can afford and access services, and then there are people who cannot afford and access these services. So while we need to actively work on making services accessible for people who cannot have access to these spaces, we also need to think about why people with access are unable to avail these services. And one of the interesting terminology that one of my friend told me was the concept of perceived affordability. you know uh, he was talking about his own experience, about how he has identified uh, his problems, his struggles, and he has also identified his therapist, but he's constantly thinking if his struggles are worth this much. So it's interesting because we are living in a capitalistic society, and we're used to function in measurements. So how do you put a price, a number on a human experience? So yeah, that's one bit. And we also like I've mentioned before, we need to hear more from people with lived experiences, sort of gauge them as compassionate friends, because one of the things that we also need to monitor is the kind of responses that we get. Once a person opens up, then how do we address them? How how can we listen to them, with actively listen to them? How can we be more compassionate towards their struggles, and while also not undermining our own struggles? So these are things that we need to learn as individuals and think of them as our own individual responsibilities. And once we start to change our own perception um, towards mental health, I think uh, we'll start seeing a lot of changes in the coming decade.
I'd just like to add one more thing, like a quick minute. I just feel that what Arpita said is absolutely right, and it makes a lot of sense. But according to me, what I feel that it comes from stereotyping and the stigma around mental health, which we of course talk about a lot. But it's actually, if we think about it more, it's actually a stereotype that if my child will go to a therapist, he is not okay. Wherein, if I have fever and I go to a doctor, it's perfectly fine to pay 500 or 1000 rupees to the doctor, and for 5 minutes from people who have money or people who have not money, it's okay for them also to pay the fee to the doctor and get the prescription. It hardly takes 5 minutes and come back. Because in our society, when it started, it was normalized to get help for physical illnesses. And even if a physical illness cost a lakh, or even if there is a doctor who takes 1500 rupee as a consultation fee for about 15 minutes, that's okay, because according to us, we have been stereotyped to believe that physical illness is very important and it should be taken care of. And when it comes to something that is deep inside of us, we don't understand that the physical illness is actually a byproduct of what we are feeling inside. To things as normal as a headache to a fever, it's actually the emotional blockages that we have inside, and it reflects in physical ailments. So what as a therapist or as individual, the awareness should be around that physical illness is not a physical illness. If you take care of your mental health, 85 to 90% of your physical illnesses are okay. And these are studies done by of course in hypnotherapy, these are studies done, and in bigger universities also, wherein it has been proved that physical illness is actually a byproduct of mentally, howsoever you are feeling. So if it's okay to pay a doctor, whether he takes, because there are psychologists who take very less money also, we are aware of them, and there are psychologists who charge 1000, 1500, 2000, or xyz. So it's okay to pay them. Why is it not okay to pay somebody for something that is actually not letting you sleep, not letting you eat properly, is taking too much of your mental space? So I personally feel what I would like to do is start from the bud, that it's okay for my child to go to a school counselor every week, talk about how he's feeling at home. And if my child wants to do that, it's fine, it's perfectly fine, it's not a bigger issue. So I just feel that we have to reverse the talk as we have been doing it up till now, whether with our friends, because even in friendships also people say, oh my god, you're talking like this, I'm giving you my therapist number, go to the therapist. It's not a joke. Therapy is not just talking, it's actually trying to release something or trying to understand a pattern. So yes, being compassionate, being motivating of your friends, of your children, of your parents to seek help and therapy as and when they need, I think that will be step one. And once that is released, I think money problem will automatically solve, because people will see it as a need, not a want. Right now people think it's a want. If I want, I'll do it. But it's actually not a want, it's actually a need.
Sports in this particular space about how it should be available not just for the classes but for the masses. But like slowly we're getting there. I think therapy is becoming slowly accessible. We know of organizations which are doing beautiful work. This one organization that we know of, they have a strictly pay what you can model. So any person who walks into that particular space is like, someone who can choose the fees that they, sort of for that therapeutic setting, or like so that, in a certain sense it gives the client the autonomy to choose however much he or she wants to, or they want to pay for the setting that they're walking into, and basis their experience or whatever it is that they sort of work through in that particular session. And I think that's a wonderful concept to, in a certain sense, normalize therapy, number one, to make it accessible, number two. So slowly and steadily we're getting there, but like all of us said, in some way or the other, baby steps, and that's just, we got to be like patient with this process.
I think I completely agree with Anuradha, because our experience with with Vishuddha has been that we discovered that there are a lot of people who want to do work wherein they actually don't think much about money. This model that she described, pay what you can. Apart from that, there is online help, people available on, and they are legit people who, like, we are very close friends too. She has had like great experiences with them, and she referred them to their clients. So their things are changing. There are organizations and there are people who want to help. It's just that we need to look out, and we need to just be aware that all the changes are happening in terms of mental health also. So
It's really great to hear about some of the organizations and initiatives that you guys have discussed. And I'm fairly certain that this is just scratching the surface. So the more we explore, the more likely we are to find several other organizations, initiatives, and individuals who are working to bridge the accessibility gap. Um, this has been a very, very informative session, and we've learned from the lived experiences of all our discussants. We've talked about therapy, and Soumya has been kind enough to share her experiences. And I feel like this is something that we can now develop from a slightly different perspective. So, we we have three mental health professionals with us, and it's my suspicion that you guys are the carriers of a very interesting dual perspective on therapy. So on the one hand, you've received formal training to provide therapeutic services. You've studied psychology and understand, the theoretical background. And more interestingly, on the other hand, you're also people. People who are more aware of their needs and requirements with respect to mental health than, say, a layperson like me. So from that informed and slightly enlightened perspective, it would be great to hear how you perceive therapy. So what is therapy like for therapists? As someone who understands the ins and outs, what to expect, what can be gained, and someone who's acutely aware of their requirements, how do you see therapy, and what is the need or the necessity of therapy for therapists?
Just asked. Yes, every therapist has a therapist, and I think it's somewhat of a like look at the other two therapists on this call smiling away. um, it's an unsaid rule. It's somewhat of a mandate for us to have a therapist. It's because when you're holding so much space for another being, it is. I mean, at the end of the day, we're also human beings, and when you're holding so much space for another human being, sometimes it can get a little heavy for us to hold that space for ourselves. And yeah, it is also very important for us to share that space with another neutral being and having that neutral perspective on your life, because sometimes it's, I mean, because if we're out there in the field, we're normalizing seeking help, and since charity begins at home, we also have to attempt to normalize seeking help for ourselves, and that's how we do it through therapy. And I think there are, I can go into technicalities, but I would just like to like not, because there are a lot of exchanges within the therapeutic settings that actually are referred back to every now and then intermittently between the exchange that we have with our own therapists. But it's mostly also a lot about self-reflective work, wherein we also uncover a lot about our past and how it affects our present, and how certain mechanisms that we pick up as children, we keep practicing, like I said, as adults, and how to break through those patterns. Like
As far as
currently,
therapy is concerned for a therapist, I personally feel that it's very important because people who are seeking therapy, and sometimes while we are learning the art of sort of facilitating somebody, we forget that all the things that we are learning in the process, we also have them. Not all of them, but there are parts of it that are in us also. Because if our clients have had a childhood, we also had a childhood. If our client has had a bad breakup, we also had it. If our client has had, a domestic abuse issue, maybe we have also seen it. So what we do is that while we are dealing with our clients, we feel like we don't need therapy, because the I according to me, it's just a personal experience. The pleasure and the happiness that you get when you see your client thriving, it gives you so much pleasure, so much immense happiness, that you feel everything is okay in your life. But there are times when you know that you have gone through stuff, and if you don't seek therapy for that, you won't be able to facilitate your client. uh, it's just that therapy is important for a therapist because work starts within your own self, and then only you can tell your client to do the self work, to do to journals about something, or to maybe talk to that concerned person about that issue. So it's very important to address your issues, to release yourself from those traumas, and it also helps you to understand your client's issues. So in the end, it just comes to one point, that in the end, therapist or no therapist, we all are humans, and human need help. The faster we accept that, easier our life is going to be. So I think my take on therapy for therapist is just this, that
The others also. I I think we all definitely gained a much better understanding of um, what providing therapeutic services would entail for a therapist, and I think you also beautifully summed up the entire discussion by pointing out how we are all human beings. Anuradha also pointed out that we all have a definite and an exhaustible carrying capacity, and we're already faced with the burdens, the emotional weight of our own lives, and whatever it is that we have to navigate through. As one person, if you have to take on and shoulder the burden of someone else, it has to have it has to have an exacting cost upon you as well. A friend mentioned some time ago about the concept of vicarious trauma, and I imagine how you would have to listen to and discuss and help people through very difficult experiences, and I can imagine that it would take a very heavy toll on you. So it's really good to know that these practices are ingrained, and as Anuradha pointed out, and I noticed that there's a mandate for therapists to have therapists. So I think just the use of the word should provide a segue into now the final portion of our discussion, which is about creating a mandate around mental health. So, having discussed at least at an introductory level what some of the issues are, what mental health is, what therapy is, what it looks like, some of the major challenges, whether we start with stigma or discrimination or lack of services or affordability gap or access gap. We've covered at least the initial issues that show up when you begin a discussion on mental health. And you guys have talked about taking baby steps in the direction of providing greater access to all and bridging the gaps. So with that in mind, let's begin concluding our discussion with a view to finding solutions and identifying what these steps ought to look like. So I turn to you guys and I ask you, where do you think we should start? What all kind of efforts do you think should be the point of commencement into a larger holistic effort towards providing mental health care access to everyone?
Yeah, so we should attempt to develop a multidisciplinary approach towards facilitating mental health care in India, and also sort of increase safe spaces for people to share their experience of mental health or their struggles of daily life, be it as a caregiver or be it as a person with a mental health concern. So once you are a part of such a space where there's no judgment and you're not afraid of repercussions, that whole experience can be life changing. So really we need to think how we can increase these safe spaces in various organizations, institutes. How can we integrate it in our health systems, our judicial systems, government sectors, corporate sectors. And I think the first step is to sort of first normalize talking about it, and then think about building safe spaces, and then eventually building a multidisciplinary approach towards facilitating mental health.
Add, so many great points have been made. One that Arpita mentioned that I really do feel is really needed is the peer support. I think that that's a great way to use this concept of friends helping each other, but create a structure around it so everyone knows exactly what kind of support they have to give, and it's a little more mutual than just I call up a friend, emotionally dump on them, and maybe they are not comfortable to do the same for me, and then it's just an asymmetrical thing. So personally for me, like a while back, like before I even seriously considered going in for therapy, I joined a sort of a group setting where we worked on things around stress and anxiety, and probably that was the closest that that this could have been to a peer support network. And just that whole process of just talking to people who were going through similar things, and not even talking about what we were going through, like to this day none of us had to share what the specific issues were, but just we talked about our experiences of feeling stressed and anxious and discussed strategies. And that fixed so much for me, just to be in a setting specifically designed for these discussions and meeting those people, and just over the course of a few days really. So I do think that's a very powerful thing, and probably a kind of a soft like a soft launch maybe for someone who wants to go into therapy but is not really sure. So definitely, if there are ways to train people to facilitate these kinds of discussions, or to create that, I think that's also more of a low cost community way to go about this, just like Alcoholics Anonymous or whatever, like that kind of a setting, but for a very different purpose.
So I think Arpita pretty much covered a lot. It's very, and I completely agree with whatever she said. It's very important to have safe spaces wherein people don't feel judged, whatever they have to talk about, because again, it's again the same thing that we have been enabled to judge people on the smallest of things. So it gets very difficult to open dialogue around a mental health illness, or even to something as small as that I need a day off because I'm stressed. The response that we usually hear from people: what is wrong in your life, you have everything. So we need to create the spaces wherein people understand that mental stress, mental health is not about owing stuff or not owing stuff. It's actually a state of mind. So yeah, I think support groups, safe space, conversations. I feel these are the latter steps. That's personal. That's my perception. It could be totally wrong. I think the first step towards building anything is, in terms of the thing that we are talking about, which is mental health, is the person being willing to accept that he has a mental health issue. And once he accepts that, he is aware of that, then I personally feel there's no stopping. Because if you love yourself, you would want to work on it in order to, and it's not even about love, it's just that if we know that something is broken in our house and we know that mosquitoes are coming in, we would want to fix that window. So it becomes the same thing, but mostly what happens here, at least in my observation, is that people don't realize that something is going off. They just feel it's okay, it's a phase, or it will change. But things change, but they stay somewhere deep inside of us. So I think the first step is to at least being aware. Once we are aware and accept, then as a society, what we can do, we can have more of these conversations within our friends, outside of our friends. Have places which are dedicated to somebody wherein they can just walk in. Let's have a space which says, come and discuss whatever it is. So people can walk in and share anything, and they know that once they are stepping out, there's no judgment. So just creating spaces is something that comes to my mind all the time whenever I think about mental health. That creating small spaces, even if it's a space for 4 people or 5 people, and just making them aware that it's okay to have to feel stressed, to have a disorder, to, because that's not who you are, that's just a part. Just the similar, just the differences.
I just want to quickly tie up what Vishaka and Arpita both said to sort of conclude this particular conversation and this particular question. Is that, like Vishaka said, that yes, like we need to address this through support groups and smaller groups. Like Arpita very beautifully, tied everything together and said that it needs to be a more multidisciplinary platform. And she spoke very elaborately about how we can, involve stakeholders in this. However, since we're in this particular setting and we're a small group of people, I want to address it right here, and like as we are right now, five people here. Um, there is Vishaka, there is Arpita here, and there's me. So just referring to the three of us as three independent psychologists who are a part of this conversation. Like off the top of our heads, I know that Vishaka is also thinking of Bhor. I bet Vishaka is thinking of Bhor, and you're thinking of the other places that run Aina, the support groups, and open peer support groups, which are beautiful. They've been running this for years, and we have been, our friends have been to those support groups, and they say they're sort of they've had great experiences, just the way Soumya said that that's the kind of experiences that she's had, that you enter a space and you just talk about your experiences. You don't even have to label your experiences, you just talk about your experiences. Those are the kind of experiences people have had. The challenge that is faced with young people currently, mostly our age, is that of accessibility. So even in this particular setting of us, like 5 people, if the 3 of us were to share these resources, and if we just randomly like send out WhatsApps to our friends and our groups, I think that little bit of change at like whatever minute level that we could make on our own is something also that's missing, because there are resources out there, but like just the way that maybe Soumya and Harsh were referring to, that they probably, because they're not in the field of psychology, they wouldn't have knowledge about these groups. Similarly, we have our friends, despite the fact that they are friends with us who are therapists ourselves, they wouldn't have this knowledge. So I think the more currently in the present, the more practical solution to begin with is to spread this kind of accessibility across, and to see how people feel about this. Put the feelers out there, see what the response is like, understand what every individual's opinion on this is and how open they are to it. I mean, I understand that challenges are faced differently by different people, but I think at a grassroots level to begin with this, because this is the one thing that we can actually right now out here, the 5 of us sitting here could just make a group on WhatsApp, share our resources, and forward those resources to our friends. So, I mean, the step should literally probably be as minuscule as something that's coming to me very naturally right now. So
we're drawing close to the end now, and I feel we've covered substantial ground through the course of this discussion. To sum up some of the things identified by the speakers, we must begin by placing mental health on the public agenda. There is a need to change society's perception and to promote greater acceptance of persons with mental disorders. We must make an earnest attempt to reduce the effects of stigma by increasing awareness and reducing misinformation. Also, we must work towards positive mental health outcomes for the population by creating safe spaces for discussion, developing peer support networks, improving policies and practices, and most importantly, by increasing awareness of the role of mental health in the quality of life of each person. I thank all our speakers for sparing their time to have this important discussion. I also thank our viewers for patiently watching through to the end. As we take the first step by starting this open discussion, we would like to invite anyone and everyone to join us and be part of the larger initiative to follow. We aim to map out the mental health landscape, create more open spaces for discussion, and to develop a framework to collaborate and address the challenges identified in the field. Whether you are living with mental health issues, working as a mental health professional, serving as a caregiver, or are just any other human being, remember that these distinctions do not divide us, since we all have mental health and are all allies to the cause of promoting better mental health for society. If you're wondering how you can get started, the first thing to do would be to educate yourself on mental health issues. Learn to be accepting and open to conversations where people talk to you about their mental health. There should be no stigma attached to having such discussions, and these should be normalized. If you or someone you know is struggling with mental health issues, don't be afraid to have an honest conversation with yourself about how you feel. This can help you better understand what you might need, and acceptance is usually the first step. Finally, and most importantly, do not be afraid to ask for help if you need it. We look forward to receiving your feedback and to collaborating with you. If you work in the field or are aware of any organizations, we would love to hear from you. You can reach us using the Mandate Project website. The link is contained in the description below. Once again, thank you very much, and we look forward to hearing from you.